including 42,000 from the aerospace manufacturing segment. Aviation ranked second in economic impact in Kansas, only to agriculture. For our aviation industry to thrive, the FAA needs a roadmap of updated congressional priorities to adopt long overdue policy changes and regulatory requirements. Delays in rulemaking and insufficiencies in the workforce are bottlenecking the industry. It's imperative that Congress passes the reauthorization bill so the FAA, its workforce, and the aviation industry are able to address the backlog of concerns that my colleagues and I have all been raising for months so that America can return to its gold standard status in aviation. A few questions, Mr. Whitaker. We've heard a lot about the FAA's rulemaking process and the importance of it for innovation, safety, and international leadership. What will you do under your tenure to make this process more timely, transparent, and accountable?
Thank you, sir. I think transparency in general, I think, needs to be improved, and efficiency needs to be improved, delivering services, registrations, for example, certification process. So we are working on those issues. Rulemaking is a little different because it's driven by the Administrative Procedures Act, so we are required to have certain time periods for comment and certain process and procedures. I think the best we can do is make sure we get that transparency and know where we are in the process and try to keep the process moving. Rulemaking can have a dozen different steps in it, and just make sure that we're continuing to keep sunlight on that and keep things moving as quickly as we can within the confines of that law.
And then can you specifically address unmanned aerial systems? In other words, how is the FAA adapting its regulatory framework to accommodate the rapid evolution of unmanned aerial systems and advanced air mobility technologies? I think we got to acknowledge that this, is here to stay. It's a growing part of the aviation industry, tremendous potential for Kansas and the rest of the country. And how do we make sure the FAA is appropriately and quickly reviewing these new technologies with safety front and center, but also not having unnecessary delays as well?
Yeah, it is one of our big challenges, and right now I think it's mostly been dealt with in a one-off manner. So I think recently we've gotten much better on the small UAS and through this exemption process, so we've been able to satisfy a lot of the BVLOS operations and such. Advanced air mobility currently would have to operate under existing rules, which is doable but not scalable, if you will. So I think what we need to do is work as an industry with all stakeholders to develop that roadmap that integrates all these technologies and tries to keep up with their pace of development. So I think we don't want to be in the way, but we need to make sure that they're being deployed safely, and that's our top priority.
Yep, I agree. As an aside, I hear from multiple manufacturers in Kansas of all sizes that just talk about how long it takes for the FAA to respond to new ideas on how do we do things better, how do we innovate, how do we make sure that the U.S. continues, that we are the world leader in the aviation space. A big part of that, of course, is manufacturing. A big part of that is having an FFA that's adaptable, understands technology, understands where the industry's heading, and how do we partner together to promote safety. So last question. In your testimony, you outlined several initiatives on increasing the air traffic controller workforce. What strategies are you implementing to bolster other fields in the aviation force, such as aircraft mechanics, pilots, other segments of the industry?
No, that's a great question, and I'm remiss for not mentioning that we're actually hiring in all these sectors. The controllers are sort of the most immediate safety need for us, but we're hiring in all sectors, and we're competing with all those other industries you just mentioned in a market that is a pretty good market if you're an employee. So I've often said I'm the chief recruiting officer for the agency, so we're doing direct outreach to schools. We're trying to cast as broad a net as we can to interest people into coming into the FAA. And maybe they come in for 30 years or maybe just 3 years. So we want to make it easier for folks to come through and have an experience there and then maybe go do something else afterwards. So it is a priority, and it's not an easy one to get after.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you, Mr. Whitaker. Congratulations on having this position. It's going to be a tough job and a tough place, but I know you're up to it, and we appreciate it very much. Aviation is so important to my district, Las Vegas. We've got a very crowded airspace with the military, with the drones, with the commercial flights, with the general aviation. So this is really critical, and I want to thank y'all for your recent investments from the bipartisan infrastructure law. You brought $49 million for the infrastructure grant funding for all the airports in my district, and that's really helpful and really appreciated for improving runway safety and taxi upgrades. But I'd like to go back to the issue of the air traffic controllers. We know that air travel is increasing, and yet the number of air traffic controllers is not. I think you hired 30 last year, including trainees. And they're often forced to work overtime 6 days a week, and that leads to stress and burnout. And would you just say again for the record how you're trying to address that issue?
You've identified all the problems that I've also identified coming in, and it's, I think, one of our most pressing needs. And I would add to that, it takes years to make an air traffic controller. Yeah. It's a long journey. It's not an easy job. It's a very rewarding job, but we need to hire as many as we possibly can. So we are ensuring that our own process is delivering as many as it can through the academy in Oklahoma City. But we also want to work with universities in the private sector to make sure we're able to pull as many from that source as well. So we've become more flexible with military hires. It used to be twice a year, so if you didn't happen to leave the military at just the right time, you had to wait 6 months. We now have a constant hiring of military controllers, which will increase the number of folks who can go directly into the towers or centers. And we're working, I think one of our most promising outlets will be these aeronautical colleges and universities, where the students can get the exact same curriculum as the academy, and then go directly into it, pass the exam, and go directly into a tower or radar facility. So going forward, that will allow us to really increase the pipeline. But in the short term, it's going to be hard to, because it takes so long, it's going to be hard to move that needle very much, at least till you get about 2 years out.
I think there's a place in some of the community colleges for developing programs like this.
I think that could certainly be eligible if they're able to teach that curriculum and have the training tools. It often requires being around a lot of retired controllers. They have a relatively early retirement age. A lot of them become instructors afterwards. So, but I think I'd like to really see that program expand as we go forward.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. If we can be helpful, let us know. Also, we're seeing more and more in different modes of transportation that companies are acting in ways that tend to prioritize profits over safety. And you mentioned in your testimony that the agency found inspections of the grounded 737-9 MAX aircraft showed Boeing's quality system issues were, and I quote, unacceptable and required further scrutiny. Do you have confidence then your suppliers that they can kind of maintain this quality control? It's not a fox guarding the hen house kind of situation?
Well, I think we're going to look at this process really top to bottom to see where the incentives are, where the failures are in the system, and we're going to demand that quality come up to the appropriate schedule. We certify aircraft to be built to very specific specifications, and they have to be built to those specifications. So regardless of their other motives, they're not going to be able to build more airplanes until they meet those standards.
Okay. You don't see a problem with conflict of interest with self-inspections?
We are looking at that specifically. We've asked MITRE, our research firm, to give us options on delegation and where we might bring in a third party, for example, in quality control or quality assurance, to make sure you have a neutral set of eyes on some of those issues. So that is something we're looking at.
Okay, and then just in a second to throw out there about the framework for beyond line of sight. Now it's based on a waiver system. We want to put those rules in place. Are you moving forward with that?
We're gonna move as quickly as we can on that one.
Okay.
Yes.
A lot of people want you to move a little more quickly.
I've been getting that message. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. Gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Westerners, Utah is a remarkable place of conversions and connections. Fastest growing state in the union right now. We have the Olympics possibly, inland ports. So it's going to be very important that that we have that conduit coming from places, a hub like Utah. That being said, the FAA has identified multiple time blocks where the DCA airport is currently underutilized. Do you believe more flights can be added safely and efficiently to that process?
So our focus on, with respect to DCA is whether it's safe. So we're not involved in the decision around where the flights can go from DCA. So our focus is entirely on the safety aspect. It is an airport that is very close to capacity. There are some hours when there's some room for new capacity, but it is, as you know, a pretty full operations. It tends to operate at around 60 operations an hour, sorry. So it's basically one a minute, so you can't really squeeze much more than that in there. So that tends to be where our focus is.
Well, according to some of the reports we got from the FAA, there are blocks in which it can be effectively done safely, according to the FAA report.
Well, we will always make sure it's operating safely.
Okay.
If something suffers, it'll be efficiency.
Okay. Outside the perimeter are tens of millions of Americans who deserve better pricing, better value, and more convenient access to D.C. representatives. I encourage you to support the efforts to provide a consumer-free market to our nation's capital. I would really appreciate that. In my hometown airport, Salt Lake City, is currently phase 2 of a 3-part, $5 billion development. Can you explain the impact of the delayed FAA reauthorization to Salt Lake City International and airports like that are going through modernization?
Yes, I think you're hitting on a very important point. These projects have a certain momentum, and they need to be funded, and they need to operate under current authorization. So I think it's vital that both of those pieces happen.
Okay. I'm going to yield my remaining time to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Hill.
Thank you. And I apologize, Mr. Administrator. These wonderful gentlemen give me their time when they don't have anything else to say, and I've got so much to talk about with you. So just for the record here, I asked you, did you write this letter? And you stated you didn't, but you had somebody ask you to write this letter. Can I ask you who asked you to write this letter dated February 5th?
So I think the discussion probably would have been with our government affairs team that focuses on providing technical assistance on legislation.
But you couldn't specifically, somebody come up to you and said, hey, Mr. Administrator, I'm drafting this letter. I want you to approve this letter so we can send out to Senators Cantwell and Cruz?
No, it comes through a correspondence. We put out a lot of correspondence, and the last 4 weeks I've been mostly busy on other topics.
Okay, so it was written by, your opinion, some government affairs team within the FAA?
Presumably, but I don't know precisely, but that normally would be how it would be developed.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. You did state that, I bring this letter up, and you stated that it is not the official position of the FAA to oppose raising the retirement age to 67, but you have some concerns, and in the letter it talks about we always prioritize a robust process to identify risk and ensure mitigations to maintain safety, but we do not test in a live environment. We do not test in a live environment. Could you tell us what that means? The members up here, what the hell's a live environment? Explain that to me.
I think I believe what that means is we don't change a rule to see how it plays out. We usually like to do the research before we change a rule.
Okay. Would you consider, are you familiar with Basic Med? Basic Med, the study, the Basic Med safety study?
Yes.
All right. The FAA authorized it. They let it run. They looked at it after 3 years, like 2017, 2018, 2019, and they reported back to Congress. It's right here. I have it here. An FAA report submitted to Congress, as required, on March 10th, reviewed 3 years of general aviation data and concluded that the Basic Med program is safe. Isn't that a live study? I mean, they were flying around. These general aviators are flying around. They're looking at whether it's a third-class medical versus a Basic Med, and they found out that Basic Med works. That is a live study. Would you agree?
Yeah, that was based on a legislative mandate.
Yeah, but I know it's a legislative mandate.
We don't
but
refuse
that is a live study, though. I mean, come on. How could you not agree with that? They're flying around, and they're reporting back 3 years of data, and they're saying, hey, there's no issues with Basic Med. That's a live study.
Right.
Okay. Just want to get that, because it says we do not test in a live environment. That's not true. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nels. Recognize Mr. Carbajal for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Administrator Whitaker. Prior to the Alaska Airlines 1282 accident, did the FAA find any evidence of persistent quality control lapses in any of Boeing's production lines?
So recognizing that to answer that question, a lot of that is before my tenure, but I think the production problems with the 787 beginning in 2019 through recently are pretty well known. And even just in December, we had an airworthiness directive around a loose bolt on a rudder system. So I think there were already some recent reports of production issues with Boeing.
Not to hammer on that, but you did mention some bolt issues recently. Has the FAA become aware of any other lapses since the start of the investigation?
So the investigation is ongoing, and we're supporting NTSB in their investigation, of course, of the incident itself. So there are no findings really to discuss at this point. The audit investigation is going on, and the only thing I can say about that, it hasn't shown any findings that have led us to immediate action. So we're just going to take the data we get from that and analyze that to decide how to move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Whitaker, one of the FAA's most successful government industry partnerships is the Contract Tower Program. 262 smaller airports participate in this critically important air traffic safety program, including 21 in California, one of which is in my district, the San Luis Obispo County Airport. This critical air traffic safety program is important to maintain and develop regional service and supports DoD flight training operations and military readiness as a pilot flight schools all across the country. It is also important to note that contract towers account for approximately 1/3 of all tower operations in the nation, and about 70% of contract controllers are veterans. Mr. Administrator, what assurances can you give me and my colleagues that contract towers will remain a priority for you?
Well, I can assure you that we certainly support the program, and given the hiring challenges we're having with air traffic controllers, no incentive to try to tinker with the system as it's working. And in fact, we also do hiring from contract towers as well, so it's a source for our own controllers. So we're fully supportive of the program and want to make sure it's working, particularly in smaller airports.
Great. Also, staffing shortages continue to be a challenge throughout the industry, which you just now touched on, including contract towers. What measures can the FAA and the industry undertake collaboratively to address staffing challenges at these towers?
I think we're doing all that we can do from our that we've been able to think of for our own hiring purposes. But I think it's become a very competitive market. There are a lot of new entrants in different aspects of aerospace. So I think we just have to really compete for those employees and give them a good working environment.
Thank you. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate you recently becoming the administrator, and I think you have your hands full with a lot of challenges, but I think you're the right person for the job, and I just wanted to recognize you for all that you bring to the table to this very important position, and all the problem solving that you're going to help us achieve. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Carbajal. Recognize the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Chavez-Remer.
Thank you, Chairman. Nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you. Thanks.
I represent Oregon's 5th Congressional District, and I'm grateful to be on this committee to ask these questions. So I'll get right started. Long delays and cancellations have become too common in airports, in large part due to the shortage of pilots. It would be ridiculous for us to look at the current state of things and say, everything is fine. Let's just keep the status quo. Last week, through my work on Education and Workforce Committee, the Flight Education Access Act was included in major student loan reform package. This is a huge step in resolving that shortage. The common sense proposal closes the pilot workforce gap by letting prospective pilots access the same loan opportunities available to students at traditional four-year schools. It increases the total maximum amount of the federal direct unsubsidized Stafford loans an eligible dependent may borrow to $11,000, increases the maximum amount for independent students to $137,500, and increases the maximum amount of federal direct Stafford loans to a total of $65,000. Mr. Administrator, if prospective pilots could access these types of student loans and use them when completing the FAA's regulated training, would that help improve the pilot shortage?
I think that would be a very useful initiative. It is very expensive to become an airline pilot, which means 1,500 hours. So you can become a private pilot with as few as 40 hours. So getting from 40 to 1,500 is a hugely expensive endeavor. So it's like any other profession, doctor, lawyer, plumber. It costs money to get there, and
so you would agree it's a positive outcome.
Absolutely.
This would be a positive initiative to move
Absolutely.
forward. So moving on, what should be the most common part of air travel safety? Of course, you've heard plenty about the Boeing Alaska accident today, and amongst others, but it is not lost on me is that it happened in Oregon, my home state. Oregonians, we choose Alaska Airlines as their preferred airline, and I fly on them every single week, back and forth. Boeing jets rightfully have cause for concern and many questions. Can you speak to the level of confidence, once again today, in the FAA-approved inspection steps for the 737-9 MAX door plug?
Yes, I think that was a very thorough inspection process, and the mechanical fix to that defect, we have a high level of confidence that takes care of the problem.
And so you'd fly on the 737-9 MAX?
Yes, I would.
Congressman Carbajal talked on my last question on the contract tower program, and I have one of those in my district in Bend. So I appreciate you answering that you are in full support of continuing that. So I will yield my time then to my colleague, Mr. Nels, the remaining time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Administrator, obviously this letter that you did not write, but you had the government affairs team write, I believe. And yeah, listen, you're a busy man. I don't think maybe you proofread this thing very clearly. I mean, there's some issues here as it relates to but we do not test in a live environment. I believe that basic med safety study is a prime example, and I have a few more, I believe, it's interesting. ALPA is taking dues from pilots in Canada over the age of 65. ALPA is taking dues from pilots over the age of 65, and we know ALPA they want to squash us. They don't want this retirement age range. WestJet is flying ALPA-represented pilots over the age of 65 right now. That is your live study, Mr. Administrator. That is your live study. Let's talk about the Part 135 operators. We allow pilots to fly over the age of 65 under Part 135. Is that not a live environment? Could you explain to everybody up here what a Part 135 is versus a 121?
A Part 135 carries a carrier typically under 30 passengers.
Sure.
Less, yeah.
NetJets would be an example?
That's correct.
All right. Do Part 121 and 135 share the same airspace?
They do.
They do. So they taxi with Part 121, i.e. the big airliners, folks, Delta, United, everything, and you can get this NetJet. Taylor Swift flying to the Super Bowl in her supersonic jet. They could be in the same airspace, taxiing on the same runway. Why do Part 135 that flies around the millionaires and the billionaires across the country, why can they fly to the age 67, but United and Delta, that gentleman, we fire him at 65? How does that make any sense?
Congress passed a law limiting them to 65?
Congress passed a law limiting them to 65.
Right.
And how do you feel about that? Do you think that's just, it's right?
I think it's what Congress did, so we don't second-guess Congress. Well, I think our point was if you're going to change it, we'd like to have some data around it.
I think that's perfect. I yield back.
Thank you, Sheriff. For the record, I'm not sure that Taylor Swift flies supersonic. Just want to make note. Gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Auchincloss, recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to second what the chairman said about the imperative for the Senate to pass the FAA reauthorization. This committee did good work, bipartisan work, and it needs to happen in the Senate now. Mr. Whitaker, you were earlier getting questions from my Republican colleagues about migrant housing at the airports. By statute, FAA has jurisdiction over airside, not landside operations at airports, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And there is one instance of the airside of an airport asking to house migrants, correct?
That's my understanding.
And there has been no documentation of airside safety being impeded at that one airport, JFK, correct?
That is the standard, yes.
And is the FAA an aeronautical safety organization, or is it an immigration agency?
Our mission is safety, sir.
The hardworking men and women of Border Patrol, which actually is this government's immigration agency, have endorsed the Senate's bipartisan deal on border security, which is a tough and fair compromise to address the migrant surge. And if my Republican colleagues are so concerned about solving this problem, I suggest that they stop asking you, sir, for answers and start asking Speaker Johnson for answers. And question number one might be, are you Donald Trump's campaign manager, or are you Speaker of the House? Sir, back to your job. You authorized the MAX airplane to fly again after the Alaska Airlines accident. Why do you believe the MAX airplane is now safe?
So the MAX 9 was grounded because of concerns about the quality of manufacturing for the plug door. So the focus of that airworthiness directive was to inspect those aircraft and come up with a repair that would ensure that it met the standard of safety built into the certification of the aircraft. Once that inspection and repair scenario was agreed upon, then the aircraft was allowed to return to service.
Now, in 2020, you took back, not you, but the FAA took back airworthiness ticketing from Boeing. What did that do for oversight of Boeing then, and was that oversight sufficient given the problems it has had at factories regarding the MAX 9?
So I wasn't there at the time, as you noted. I guess I would say in retrospect, and given what happened with the plug door, it's hard to call that oversight sufficient. So we're looking at that process and what additional steps need to be taken to make sure that that oversight is sufficient.
Last August, the FAA announced almost $45 million in funding for Boston Logan International Airport to simplify the airfield layout and reduce the risk of runway incursions. Can you speak to how investments like that will improve passenger safety and any other work the FAA is doing to reduce the risk of near misses?
So issues that happen in the airport environment and on runways, each airport is unique. It has its own geometry, and certain geometries create natural situations that can cause confusion. So trying to, and we call them hotspots, trying to identify those hotspots and correct them, either through signage, lighting, or sometimes moving taxiways, is highly effective in keeping them safer. So the good news about these type of events is there are really straightforward solutions, and we've been deploying those solutions.
I want to join my colleagues in saying how happy we are to have you in this position, how qualified I think you are for this job, and looking forward to seeing the work that you can do for maintaining and improving America's gold standard reputation for airline safety.
Thank you.
Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Auchincloss. Recognize the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Yakin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Whitaker, for being here today. After a robust, open, and transparent and bipartisan process, the House passed its FAA reauthorization last July in an overwhelming 351-69 vote. And it appears we're finally going to see some welcome movement from our colleagues in the Senate later on this week. Hopefully that means we can soon provide certainty and stability to your agency, to the aviation community, and to the flying public with an FAA reauthorization centered around our gold standard of safety and continued American aviation leadership. But it's that leadership I'd like to speak about today, or in this particular case, the lack thereof. As we held hearings in the lead up to our FAA reauthorization bill, we heard from witnesses, especially in the drone delivery industry, who said that they were expanding in markets like Australia instead of the United States due to a lack of regulatory certainty. I've been encouraged to see the FAA in recent months issuing a number of Part 107 waivers that enable beyond visual line-of-sight operations for drone delivery companies. The waivers represent another step in a long journey that must strike that fine balance between safety and forward momentum. But it's a journey that, in my estimation, has been moving far too slow. Mr. Whitaker, earlier you told my colleague, Chairman Graves, that the BVLOS notice of proposed rulemaking will be published, quote, this year. Last September, an FAA official had pegged that timeline at August of 2024. Is that timeline slipping, or is August still the goal?
I can look, if you like, I'll give you a specific answer. I was covering for my lack of memory on an exact date, so.
Yeah, I would like a specific answer if you don't mind.
I'll just circle back with you. I will give you a precise answer. I just don't recall.
Great. I would like a precise answer on that. And furthermore, if the timeline from August, which was told, or an FAA administrator told, or official told back in September, if that timeline from August is slipping, I would like to have you circle back and articulate why within the FAA that timeline is slipping. And then my second question is, once that notice is published, are you able to commit to publishing a final rule within 12 months of the notice of proposed rulemaking?
I can commit to keeping the rule moving as quickly as possible. It depends on what comments come in, how they get arbitrated, and then it has to go through a review process, as you know, up through OIRA. But we will give as much transparency as possible and try to keep that moving as much as possible. I think it's an important rule, and we want to get it out.
Great. I agree with you. It is an important rule, and it's one that, due to so many delays in timelines, we have companies who are reevaluating their innovation, their R&D right here in the United States. We want companies to continue to make those investments here in the United States.
I agree, yes.
Thank you for your commitment to moving forward. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Mr. Nels.
Thank you, sir.
Nels.
So we've talked about this letter. We've talked about the fact that I don't believe it was proofread, sir. I really don't. You seem to be a great guy. I think you have a bright future, but this letter is full of inaccuracies. It has flaws. It says we don't test in a live environment, but I don't believe you believe that. I just think that that's not what you believe, and I think we can point that out. The last sentence of the letter, it says, quote, "It is critical to provide the agency an opportunity to conduct research and determine mitigations." You talk about conducting research. Everybody that's listening, watching, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, our friends to the north, Canada, all have pilots above the age of 67. They've had no safety issues. Zero, no safety issues. The head of the FAA in New Zealand, I went up to ICAO. I flew up to Canada, went to the ICAO meeting. The FAA administrator of New Zealand said they have pilots flying up to the age of 75, and they have no issues. That's your live study, sir. Call them. Ask them. I even got, believe it or not, John Prater, the former president of Airline Pilots Association. It says, in the past, reference 60 to 65, in the past, commercial airline pilots who did not want to stop working at age 60 took jobs with international airlines or charter operators for which the retirement age was higher. The experience of these pilots should also be studied, said John Prater, president of ALPA. Quote, "You can look globally, look at Canada, and look at pilots flying in corporate aviation and on-demand services like NetJets." He says, referring to a large private aviation, the GAO could expand and ask the airlines themselves. That's the avenue they could investigate if they choose to expand their look, end quote. I yield.
Thank you, Sheriff. Recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Allred.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing. It's on an incredibly important topic at an important time. And thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here. I know that we're all united in wanting to restore confidence in our air travel. You know, when we have some Americans travel quite a bit, as we all do, and I was sitting next to some folks the other day who were saying that they were filtering out in their travel plans the planes that they think are unsafe. And when we have that, we know that we have to respond. And so we have to respond together. Here on our responsibility is to help you to ensure that we remain the gold standard. And you certainly have my commitment on that. And I wanted to just ask you about, in reference to Boeing's internal oversight, you say that it's time to re-examine the delegation of authority and assess any associated safety risks. Can you discuss how the FAA intends to change oversight at the manufacturing sites to meet this goal?
So what we're doing a number of things. We're doing an audit of the manufacturing process. We are looking into what is delegated, what could be overseen by a third party. And we have inspectors on the ground talking to employees to understand sort of the ground truth, if you will, of what's happening, what the pressures are. And based on that outcome, we will look at putting together a program to continue to add direct oversight to what otherwise was sort of an auditing approach, so a much more hands-on approach going forward. That'll be really designed after this 6-week audit period is finished and we have a better understanding of what's going on in the factory.
And do you need any further authorizations or support from the Congress in order to do that? Is there anything in the FAA reauthorization that would assist in that?
Well, I do appreciate you saying that the willingness to work together. I do think with a problem like this, we all need to be rowing in the same direction. Congress, Boeing, the airlines, the FAA. I think we all want the same outcome, which is safe airplanes. So we will certainly come back with you on that. I think we do anticipate needing to hire more inspectors. The oversight before was a different skill set, and we need folks who are trained to be on the ground and much more hands-on. So we do anticipate some hiring. I think we have the authorizing authority to do that. We may need to find the money to do it, but I think that'll be a top priority, and we'll either come back for that or we'll make it work one way or the other.
Because there's an inherent tension here between competition, the need to rush products to market. I remember back when we dealt with the MAX initially, a few years back, some of the internal discussions about needing to compete when you're also your own regulator or your own doing your own internal reviews. And so it seems to me that we have to have more on our side in terms of independent investigators. And I recognize the cost associated with that, but I think that for the American flying public, it's a cost that's worth us bearing in terms of making sure that we don't have another incident like what we had. And so in order to have a truly safe system, it seems to me that we can't rely on the manufacturers themselves to be their own watchdogs. Is that something you would agree with?
I certainly agree that the current system is not working because it's not delivering safe aircraft. So we have to make some changes to that. And I think we also have to look at the culture. To your point, incentives drive behavior, and I think maybe we need to look at the incentives to make sure safety is getting the appropriate first rung of consideration that it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, I played in the NFL, and if they'd let us be our own referees, you know, every time an offensive lineman tried to block me, it would have been a holding call. You know what I'm saying? So I think this is certainly something we should work on. I wanted to come really quickly to the announcement that you just issued about the installation of the first modernized tower simulation system for traffic controller training in my state, Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Can you elaborate how this technology will benefit our controller workforce that's already stretched so thin?
So these simulators, they're in a way a simple technology. It's a circle of screens that really reproduces the environment of that particular airport and allows controllers to train on that environment. So that works for new controllers, but also if you have a system, if you have a problem at your airport, for example, a hotspot area, or some other persistent problem that we've identified, existing controllers can actually train to that problem in that simulator. So it can be thrown at them as a situation to see how they respond and becomes a learning tool. So it's really important for current training, but also for helping move controllers fast through the training process.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. Recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Whitaker. We welcome your leadership. It goes without question. The FAA, in at least my estimation, and many others, has been in need of leadership, and certainly FAA reauthorization, critically important. We're hopeful the Senate moves earnestly and that we can move that bill to law. Without question, Americans have witnessed too many alarming incidents, from aircraft employee treatment to aircraft safety and passenger experience. I appreciated participating in the briefing last week regarding the door plug incident, and look forward, obviously, to the NTSB report and FAA's reaction and response. On the topic of safety, I was very happy to see in your testimony a reference FAA rulemaking on drug and alcohol testing for foreign repair stations. One of the first bills I introduced was the Global Aircraft Maintenance Safety Improvement Act, which ensures parity of safety protocols between domestic and foreign aircraft maintenance, you're familiar with. I'm very happy to say this provision has been included in the House-passed FAA reauthorization, and I'm hopeful that it will remain a part of final law. In the area of, in particular, both treatment of aircraft employees and passenger experience, supporting mental health and breaking down barriers is a top priority of many of ours. It's why I joined Chairman Garrett Graves, in urging the FAA to modernize its mental health protocols and take immediate steps to dismantle barriers that discourage individuals from seeking care. I do appreciate in your testimony that you referenced the FAA's Mental Health and Aviation Medical Class Aviation Rulemaking Committee. I certainly, as do others, urge swift release of the report that comes from that committee and ask, sir, for your commitment here today in supporting making mental health and the treatment, in particular of aircraft employees, a top priority within FAA's regulatory environment.
Yes, sir, it is a top priority, and I think it's long overdue to update the approach to mental health and just treat these as health issues and have a clear path to treatment and get people back in the cockpit as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we certainly acknowledge the rise in mental health concerns across America. They are made even more dangerous in confined environments like aircraft, and certainly men and women who are flying or participate in keeping us safe in that arena deserve adequate care. So I certainly look forward to the progress and urge swift action. Another question that I just wanted to touch on as it relates to advanced air mobility, a topic that we all have focused on pretty acutely. Can you provide us a timing on the powered lift SFAR? As far as you know, the FAA committed, as far as I know, committed to completing it in 2024. I'm certainly interested, as in others, in hearing your insights and hearing what stage of development the SFAR is in.
So that rule is under development, and we do expect a final rule by the end of the year.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I want to reinforce my support of your efforts. In response to a comment and question from my colleague from Massachusetts, I just would note the FAA, when it desires to, has a great deal of influence on landside activity at airports. Having managed one, I know that firsthand. And certainly when there needs to be FAA clarity, I encourage it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Nelson.
Thank you again, sir. In the letter, again, it is critical to provide the agency an opportunity to conduct research and determine mitigations. We talk about the research. I mentioned to you, sir, and thank you for being here, I mentioned you Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Canada. They are all operating with pilots over the age of 67. Do you think it would be a good idea to maybe reach out to those countries and ask them, hey, how's it working for you, Canada to the north? I mean, any issues with this? I mean, we're all human beings. Any issues? Do you think that would be maybe a good idea to try to help accomplish what you asked for in this letter, to conduct research and determine mitigations?
Certainly, if the legislation is passed, we will look at that option.
Yes, I think it's very, very important because it's all there for you. I talk a little bit about the 135s, right? These Part 135 operators that are flying the millionaires and billionaires. A lot of people can't fly that in this room here. They're flying around the millionaires and the billionaires, and those pilots can be 67 years old. And the FAA is okay with that, correct? I mean, they can fly 67 years old and fly the millionaires and billionaires in the same airspace. And Brosi argued with me on that one. The ALPA president said, oh, no, they don't operate in the same. He's not being truthful. They fly in the same airspace. You would agree with that?
Do I agree that they fly in the same airspace?
Yes.
They do, yes.
So how can we allow pilots to be 67 to fly the millionaires and the billionaires, but not allow Delta, United, and American to do it when we know we have a pilot shortage?
Well, we don't set these age limits. The Congress does that.
I know it. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it today.
Thank you, Sheriff. Recognize the patient gentlelady from California, Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Welcome, Mr. Administrator. Thank you for being here. Last week, we learned again about Spirit Aerospace, and they incorrectly drilled holes in the fuselage. I'm wondering if you know at this point in time, has FAA determined how many aircraft were delivered to customers with these problems, and what actions are being taken to address this newest problem with Boeing and its supplier?
So we're working with Boeing to understand what happened here, and so we're investigating that piece of it. These are small rivets that hold a window in place. So likely what that means is we know it's not to compliance, so we want to understand why it has not been manufactured per design, and then we'll see what corrective actions need to be taken to repair the windows and when that has to happen.
I'm talking about incorrectly drilled in the fuselage, that they had drilled holes that were too close to the edge.
Yeah, those were around a window holding.
Oh, they okay.
Yeah, in the fuselage.
Okay, very good, very good. The House FAA reauthorization bill would create a new deputy administrator for safety and operations to engage in the certification and operational approval of life-saving technologies. Can you share your thoughts on how technology will improve aviation safety and how you would use the new deputy administrator role to further advance technologies?
I think that technology has been one of the great tools that we've had to reduce the accident rate in aviation. And I think there's a lot of benefit in expanding what's available, particularly into GA aircraft, to provide more situational awareness in the cockpit. I think the focus needs to be looking at ways to bring that kind of technology to market as quickly as possible, recognizing the positive impact that it has on safety. So I could see that role being helping to facilitate that action.
So the deputy administrator would be really responsible to trying to really prioritize this within the organization?
I think we always want to prioritize safety, but it would be an additional resource to have perhaps quicker implementation.
Great. Thank you for that. The FAA and PASS, the Professional Aviation Safety Specialists, have been in collective bargaining for over 2 years now. What's the status of that?
My understanding is that the vast majority of terms have been agreed. There are, as happens in these types of things, a handful that are still outstanding. We're committed to working as quickly as possible to try to get to final resolution.
I understand that following the January 24th FAA approval of the 737 MAX 9 inspection plans, both Alaska and United began to return aircraft to service. Do you know how many aircraft remain to be inspected, and have you heard from these airlines what their total estimated losses have been since the original grounding?
I don't have any information on the financial impact of this, and I'm sure they're dealing directly with Boeing. As far as the number of aircraft returned to service, I think it's been about 90% so far. I don't have a precise number, but most of them have been returned to service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
You didn't want to yield your time to the gentleman from Texas?
I thought about it, but I thought I would pass.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. Recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to thank Administrator Whitaker for being here today. Runway safety is a critical aspect of aviation. Many runway instances and near misses have been reported over the past year, and you outlined in your testimony the actions the FAA has taken to address these risks. What are some of the challenges you still face in addressing such safety risks?
I think we don't have a lot of direct barriers other than sort of capacity of manpower. So we've dispatched runway safety teams to virtually every major airport in the country to review the geometry of the airport and to assess what technologies might be helpful, whether it's as simple as lightings or signs or a more complex surface awareness technology. It's the surface awareness technology in the tower that's the most helpful, and I think that's sort of the long pole in the tent at this point.
Okay. How is the FAA addressing workforce challenges, particularly in terms of acquiring and maintaining the expertise necessary for certifying new technologies such as unmanned aircraft systems and advancing air mobility technology?
So these new technologies do present challenges for us on the certification side. There are a lot of new systems, a lot of new capabilities that are new to aviation. So bringing in the right workforce to work those issues is an ongoing challenge. We're competing with all these companies out there that are developing those technologies, but we're working to make sure we have those resources in place.
What is the FAA doing to ensure that the agency is ready to fully implement the FAA reauthorization legislation, which the Senate has yet to act on when it's signed into the President and enacted into law? Are you doing anything to anticipate your reauthorization in-house?
Are you talking about the new legislation
Yes.
coming in? So when that legislation is complete, we have a process that we'll run to identify the projects for us that come out of that and set up a sort of a program management approach so that we are tracking those, trying to meet the deadlines. And if the deadlines are not achievable, communicating that as quickly as possible. But I think the key will be open communication with the committee.
If I may, I would recommend there's got to be broad agreement, as you can see, and this administration must be able to see between what this committee and this chamber, as well as what the Senate is looking at, that you can anticipate what's coming in a number of areas.
Right.
So I would anticipate, if I may, if you can also anticipate some of this efforts.
Yes, sir.
And with that, I will yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Nels from Texas.
Thank you, sir. In your early testimony, you talked about you established I think it was an independent safety review team for the Boeing situation. Is that correct? To look at Boeing?
There was an independent safety review team established last year before I came in response to near misses.
Sure.
And they put out a report in November.
Mm-hmm. And I'm all about safety. I know you are. Everybody in America wants to have, we got the greatest aviation. I mean, our reputation is rock solid. We are safe. We have done a very good job in this country as it relates to aviation safety. Could you consider asking a group like that to go review some of the records from Japan, New Zealand, Canada, to look at it? I mean, it's a safety review team. Get the records. Ask them, hey, tell us a little bit about your history over here and your programs and having these pilots at 67 flying around up to 70. How's it working out? Don't you think that would be very useful information, not only for Congress here, but for the FAA, the administrator specifically?
If that legislation does raise the age, we will certainly look at all the tools available.
Absolutely, and I think that's fantastic. Even with the Part 135s. I mean, are you aware of any issues related to like Part 135s? I mean, has your office received phone calls about potential issues related to all the 135 operators that are flying right now while we're having this conversation? You get all the data, don't you? I mean, are you a receptacle of a lot of the complaints and the data safety regulations as it relates to Part 135?
We would certainly look at that data as part of that.
Do you feel that, I mean, are you aware of any issues with these pilots flying around in the same airspace as Delta at age 67 with the Part 135s?
I have not looked at the data to see if there are any issues around that.
I think, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. I'll take a moment of personal privilege here. Stafford to my right keeps screwing up this list. I've had enough of this, and so we're going to go ahead and fire him. Seriously, to my right is Chris Sen, who has served in our military, got a master's in aviation and new entrance in the market, has a law degree, and has been an incredible asset to this committee as we've gone through and built this near-perfect aviation bill. I think this is going to be the last subcommittee action this week, and I just want to take a minute. He's going to be taking off at the beginning of next month, and I just want to thank him for his dedicated service working in a bipartisan manner with the entire aviation team. And I'll say it again, has just been a tremendous asset to the committee, and really do appreciate his service. So. But I did want to fire him before he was able to resign. So, Chris, thank you very much. Really do appreciate your service and friendship, and good luck. With that, I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Fasalian, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add my thanks to your staff. I also want to, right at the beginning, say to Mr. Nels, I'm too old to yield any time to you, so you're not going to get any of my time. Mr. Administrator, you have a long, illustrious career, and I agree with many of the comments, but you've seen this industry, your organization and the industry regulates both the manufacturers and the airline companies. Clearly, the world has changed, and I worry, you mentioned this in your opening statements, it's the near misses, it's the manufacturing problems, it's NOTAMs, it's runway incursions. All of those things, to me, send bright red warning signs. And what I hear from you so far is you accept that, not to be Pollyannish, but we can't rest on our laurels. And I'm afraid in many of these hearings prior to you getting your position, my sense is that the FAA was resting on its previous track record. And quite frankly, your organization reminds me of NASA just before the Challenger disaster and the observation by the commission that institutional deviation, but with you, it's writ large into the culture. So that is a comment, the safety culture of these companies. The perfect storm to me is this long, wonderful relationship between the Department of Defense, the military, and aviation, both contractually in manufacturing and supplying workforce. And then this changing. At the same time, we have issues around climate change, and we're coming out of COVID. Airbus and Boeing, they had great profits after consolidation, and now Boeing is losing money. Airbus is close to losing money. Similarly, in your conversations with the air carriers, the commercial air carriers, enormous pressure. Warren Buffett had a great line about investing in airlines. He said, I have an 800 number, I call at 3 in the morning to say, this is Warren Buffett, I'm afraid I'm going to invest in air stocks again, please talk me out of it. But he still did it. So the safety culture versus the risk assessment from the details of, in the FAA reauthorization, one of the parts that we put in there, in the case of Alaska, the root cause can go back and find out who actually worked on that plane, what hours they worked on. I'm told Airbus has that information when they do it. So those simple things from the safety culture writ large, I would like your response. And as you talk to the CEOs who are under enormous pressure coming out of COVID, when we kept them in business, and with ridership going up, to avoid losses in an investment market that can move very quickly away from them, that would create greater damage. And then on top of that, you've got Boeing that's not going to be able to supply the product that they're contractually already into and have serious financial disadvantage to delay that too long. So that's a long question about safety culture. How do you maintain a safety culture or return to that safety culture that we used to have and I think we've lost, and we're one disaster away from the industry imploding?
Thank you for the question. I think you've hit on some really true points. I have been reemphasizing since I've been at the agency that we can't rest on our laurels. We have to be ever vigilant to look for risks in the system, and that's been the focus for the past 3 months. And safety, culture and safety is really important, and it's one of the things we're going to be looking at with Boeing. We've got a safety culture review that was commissioned as part of the CERT reform legislation that's going to be complete later this month, and I think that will be informative. But at the end of the day, the goal is to make safe airplanes, and I don't think if you don't have that safety culture, I think it's hard to make safe airplanes. So we're going to be very focused on the quality process, and really looking at wherever the data takes us as we do this audit. We have to get back to a culture where safety is first. I don't care what's second, but safety has to be first, and that's where we need to get.
And on the operational side, on the NOTAMs or the near misses, same thing. I've talked to pilots who really express, and air traffic controllers, that we're pushing a lot of product from pressure from the operators.
Yeah, that's right, and I think in my realm, controllers was one of the first orders of business. It's a lot of folks working overtime. and have been doing so for years, and that's not a sustainable thing in my view. So hiring as many controllers as we can and looking at fatigue as a risk that needs to be mitigated is our approach there.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Administrator, I want to thank you for being here today. And I know that it was touched upon by a couple of my colleagues already, but I have some further questions. 92 days ago, you were copied on a letter that was sent to the Transportation Secretary by members not only of this committee and other committees, but by the chairman of the subcommittee, the chairman of the full committee, and 68 other members of the House. The letter asked very straightforward questions about the Biden administration's plan to house illegal immigrants and migrants at FAA sites and airports, some of our largest transportation hubs in this nation, including one that's just blocks away from my district at JFK Airport. We requested a response by November 20th, 2023. Today is February 6th, 2024, and we haven't gotten any response. So I'd like to submit the letter for the record, again, signed by 68 other members of the House, sent 92 days ago. And since we haven't heard back, I'd like to pose the questions from the letter to you right now. How many and which airports regulated by the FAA currently host temporary or permanent shelters for illegal immigrants or other persons?
I don't have any information about that.
Okay. I also want to point out that probably not mentioned in the letter, and I know wasn't mentioned by my colleagues, I took a visit to JFK Airport just days after this site was apparently approved. I coordinated with Mayor Adams' office, I coordinated with the Port Authority, TSA, and I spent a career in the NYPD as a detective. And one of the most startling things that I found when I got to JFK Airport was not the fact that the FAA or the City of New York actually had me go all the way to JFK Airport only to tell me that the meeting was canceled and they were not going to allow me to tour the facility. But the biggest concern that I have is that there is zero communication amongst agencies at that airport. Nobody knows who's in there. Nobody knows what's going on. I mean, it is a transportation hub, probably one of the largest in the country, and we have people just wandering the streets coming out of this facility. I'm not sure how anyone thought that this was a good idea. Has the FAA received or granted any request from an airport or a local, state, or federal agency between January 20th, 2021 and today to temporarily use a facility for purposes of hosting a migrant shelter?
I don't have direct information. I'm happy to respond after with a response to that.
To what extent has DHS consulted with the FAA about the appropriateness of proposing to house migrants at airports?
I don't have any direct information about that.
If DHS has consulted with the FAA, what has been the FAA's response?
Again, I have no direct information on this.
Committee staff asked in a follow-up email if the FAA could provide a detailed description of any analysis or assessment of the DHS housing plan or any other instance of airport migrant housing that has been conducted by the FAA in accordance with the FAA's safety risk management policy. The decision to approve housing of migrants poses a serious security threat and represents failure of the Biden administration's disastrous border policies. Does the FAA have a plan in place to ensure that any of these sites, even the ones that perhaps you don't know about yet, will no longer be used to house migrants?
I don't have any information about that.
Okay. So you're the administrator of the FAA, and you don't have any information on any FAA locations that have housed migrants or could potentially house migrants?
To my knowledge, there are no FAA locations that house migrants.
To your knowledge, are there any FAA locations that were approved to house migrants?
I mean, I don't consider an airport an FAA location. Maybe you're talking about airports?
The FAA has to approve in order for them to become migrant shelters.
We approve community use agreements, yes.
Okay. And at no point did the FAA think that perhaps it was a bad idea to house migrants in these locations?
I don't have any information on what FAA was thinking before I got there.
Okay. So when did you take reins as administrator?
End of October.
End of October. Okay, so on November 6, 2023 was when the letter was sent. It's now February 6, 2024. We still haven't received a response. Will you commit today in front of this committee that in 1 month you will respond to the questions that were asked in this letter?
1 month from today, I will, yes.
From 1 month today. So by March 6th of 2024, we will have an answer to all of the questions.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I now recognize from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez.
Thank you, Chairman. Today I want to focus on the constant helicopter noise we face in our district, in New Jersey's 8th Congressional District. It's a densely populated urban area. I've heard from countless constituents about helicopters that fly at low altitudes for prolonged periods of time, shaking apartment buildings and disrupting enjoyment of public spaces, such as our urban oasis of Liberty State Park. Residents are also concerned that helicopters have been using new flight paths without input or notice to residents. How does the FAA monitor and enforce helicopter altitudes and decibel limits in areas like New Jersey's 8th Congressional District and Liberty State Park?
So we don't have direct authority over noise per se, but what we do have is operating rules for helicopters. So they're required to operate at certain altitudes as they traverse land. But beyond that, it's they fly routes according to what's available in the airspace.
And the monitoring component, how do you monitor their altitude?
Well, they monitor their own altitude. We would get reports if there's altitude deviations. That could come from a variety of sources, but for all operations in the air, there are certain minimum altitudes to be operated at.
Understood. And what can the FAA do to address persistent and burdensome helicopter noise?
So I think the most effective tool that we have found is community meetings sponsored by a government entity, usually an airport, that are open and inclusive, so include not only the immediate affected areas, but also areas surrounding that, so that there's an ability to have a community dialogue around solutions.
Great, and that's a great segue. Last week I wrote to you highlighting the impact helicopter noise has on the district. My office and the Hudson County Board of Commissioners have received a growing level of complaints and are requesting the opportunity to discuss the issue and potential solutions during a public meeting with your representative from the FAA. I want to formally invite you to our district to experience this issue firsthand and to work together towards a solution by attending this public meeting with the Hudson County Board of Commissioners.
We'd be happy to have a representative participate, provided it's, as I mentioned, a government-sponsored meeting and one that includes a very broad community. And I think it's also useful to include zoning officials, since some of this is also zoning related, which is outside of our domain as well, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, and we would be happy to build a broad coalition of folks there and different stakeholders to ensure that's a productive meeting for the representative that's able to attend. Switching gears, I'm glad that the FAA has taken serious steps to deal with terrible assaults and violent incidents against flight crews, and I commend the agency's efforts in taking on this issue. However, I'm still concerned that assaults against landside employees aren't receiving the same level of response. These workers work directly with customers who are experiencing delays, cancellations, or other complications with their travel. The 2018 FAA reauthorization bill tasked the FAA with implementing employee assault prevention and response plans. Those plans have yet to be put into place, and I've tried to fix this problem through my bill, the Airline Employee Assault Prevention Act. While I'm pleased that the House-passed version included pieces of this bill, the work is far from over. Mr. Whitaker, do you know why these plans haven't been implemented yet?
I'm not familiar with that specific plan. I do share your concern about obviously assaults on not only flight crew but in the airport. I think the airport space becomes a little more complicated. You don't have the clear authorities and the sort of captive environment, it's unclear, for example, what TSA's involvement might be, what the local police involvement might be, what the airport's involvement. So I think the issue becomes murkier in the airport environment. This issue has been raised to me, and I've had some discussions with airport directors about that. So it is an issue of concern.
Yeah, and we understand it's a jurisdictional issue, and that's what part of our legislation was meant to address, to ensure that these assault prevention plans cover both the air and land side. And so I want to make sure we work with all partners to ensure that all folks and employees are kept safe, especially sort of as some of these travel challenges lead to upset passengers and they have unfortunate impacts. So I look forward to working with you on this issue and appreciate your testimony here today. Thanks so much.
Sir. Yeah, we will follow up on that issue with you.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Menendez, and I recognize Mr. Massey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, I've heard from several aircraft manufacturers and component manufacturers that the certification process at the FAA has become even more long and arduous than normal in a post-COVID era. Some of this they attribute to people not returning to work in the office yet after COVID. Some of it is because there are a lot of new employees who don't have as much familiarity as the more senior employees did who left. What are you doing, or what do you plan to do to improve this certification process so that U.S. companies can be competitive and improve safety and efficiency for our pilots and passengers?
So it is a very important issue, and we have a number of things that we're looking at doing. One is creating more transparency in the process. So we identify where an application is, why it's not moving. So sometimes it's because we're still waiting for data, or sometimes maybe we have the data and we're not moving fast enough. So we want to get some certainty around that. I think there's been a little bit of overcorrection following the MAX events, frankly, a little more conservative approach, and I think having clear leadership and clear process so we can resolve decisions is an important part of that, and we're looking at ways to do that. It's an important issue and one we're working on.
There's another area of efficiency that I've heard from people that may need to be addressed, and I might not be articulating this exactly correctly, but a pilot explained to me that when pilots have to leave for health reasons and then that health reason is overcome and then they try to get back into the system, that there's not enough people, or that process is also being delayed and has a long lead time. And I think that's particularly problematic given the chronic shortage of pilots. Is he correct in that, and is there anything you can do about that?
He is correct in that. I've had 2 flight instructors who both went through that, and they both complained to me about how long it took. So we're trying to move that approach. It's not unrelated to the mental health arc that we've stood up, just trying to make the system clearer and be able to get to decisions more quickly. So that's something we're looking at as well.
Another thing in that line of questioning with pilot shortages, training is a big issue, and getting pilots through that process. And it just came to my attention that the GI Bill, it's a great program for veterans, and it covers a lot of things, but it doesn't cover some of the things that you need to become a pilot. And I would think using a GI Bill to get those hours that you need to become a certified pilot may be more important than basket weaving, a degree in basket weaving, which the GI Bill will cover. So would you be supportive of having more flexibility in the GI Bill so that we could use that money that these veterans have earned in service to their country in order to become pilots?
I absolutely would, and I would favor treating pilot training the way you treat any other educational endeavor to get a status. It's expensive to become a pilot, takes a long time, so I would fully support that.
Another question that I have, we used to see these notices at the airport that said you need to have a real ID to fly come a certain date, and that date kept getting pushed back, and now I don't see the signs at all. Are we going to have a real ID, or that has the new and improved driver's license, if you will, in order to fly anytime soon?
That would typically be regulated by TSA, so I'm not really familiar with that issue.
Okay. Because, I think it is a concern. There's a lot of bureaucracy that was implemented in order to do all that. One other question that I have is, I know a lot of, maybe not a lot, but there were some pilots who left because of vaccine mandates, and I don't know if the air traffic controllers had that same issue, but what are you doing to make it easier for them to come back to work?
It's not an issue that I've run across. I'll look into that and happy to respond.
But you are aware that some pilots did leave because of the COVID vaccine mandate?
Well, that would be between the pilots and the airlines, but I can look into the controller. It's not an issue I've become familiar with, but I'm happy to look at it.
Well, if we're looking into I appreciate you agreeing to look into that. Because we're looking into the chronic shortage, which does affect issues that you do have to deal with. I think that's an important thing to look at. Yep. So appreciate your time today, and good luck finding all the inefficiencies. I'm sure you'll find all of them, and you'll have perfect solutions to everything. And thank you for addressing the certification process, because I think that is really important. We want to make sure U.S. companies are competitive and they can get their products certified. That will increase awareness and safety for pilots and passengers.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. I now recognize Ms. Sultan for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank our chairman and ranking member for hosting this hearing, and thank you so much, Mr. Whitaker, for taking the time to be here, not only as a member of this committee, but as a mother and a frequent flyer myself. Now, because of this is also a deeply personal issue. When I fly with my kids and back home to my kids, the safety and security of air travel is essential. You have a mighty task in this new role, and we know that you are up to it. I thank you for your patience in handling all the questions today. I have 2 questions for you. One is general for all air travelers, and then another specific for my district. We've talked a little bit in this hearing today about the differences in approval delegations. We on this committee may understand the differences between design and manufacturing approval delegations, but for the American people, they don't necessarily know that. They know that hundreds of people died in 2018 and 2019 because of the Boeing 737 MAXs. And they know that now there are terrifying experiences happening to travelers on essentially those same planes. What are we doing to not only assure safety, but that assure that people can feel safe in this after this investigation process? Maybe more specifically, what are you specifically tasking MITRE to examine in terms of reclaiming certain approval authorities? And if you can give some examples of that.
Thank you. So the MITRE tasking is to really look at what's been delegated and what our options are for reeling in that delegation, and what areas are being undertaken by the manufacturer that could be done by a third party, for example. So really it's a question of looking at having a neutral third party overseeing parts of this process. So we'll see what they come up with. You're right, there's confusion between the design delegation, which is really where a lot of delegation happens, and manufacturing, where there's less delegation, but there are functions that look like oversight, like quality control, that don't seem to be being properly executed. So the audit is designed to allow us to really understand what are the impacted areas, why is it not working, and what are our tools for fixing it, whether that's bring a third party in to oversee it or somehow change other incentives or the process.
Thank you. Again, for the sake of the passengers, for the sake of the industry, which we all rely on, we implore you to make it clear in these studies what has been done and what has been undertaken to assure safety for the American people going forward.
Yes.
My second question is a little bit more district specific. Grand Rapids is home to the Gerald R. Ford International Airport. It is one of the busiest 75 airports in the entire country, one of the first airports to return to pre-pandemic levels. We had record travel numbers in 2023, close to 4 million travelers through the terminal, up 6% from a previous record in 2019. And yet, it has the oldest airport tower of all of the top 75 busiest. Currently, there are no standards for how and when we replace these airport towers. I hope to change that through my bill, which was included in the FAA reauthorization, which we're hoping the Senate will act on any day now. But the important thing is, you don't need to wait for them to act. The FAA owns this tower, and the community cannot replace it until the FAA says so. Can you speak a little bit to the importance of infrastructure in ensuring safety around the country?
So I can. Infrastructure is a huge challenge. We have a lot of it at FAA, and a lot of it is really beyond its useful life, including, for example, all of the high altitude control centers that are designed for no more than 50 years of service, and they're pushing 60 at this point. The funding for that has been a challenge over time, and maintenance falls behind. So I can certainly look into that particular instance that you've cited, but it is a problem throughout the NAS.
Thank you, and we'd be grateful for you having a look.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you again for your testimonies today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Collins for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see there, Administrator Whitaker. And I guess I want to kind of start out with, I've been running like crazy, so I had to change hats for a second. But I had the opportunity last year to go to the Atlanta airport. I'm out of Georgia, and visited the tower, the airport, and TRACON. So we've down to just one more facility that we want to visit up there, and very impressive. So I know you've got your work cut out for you, and like so many agencies and so many hearings that I attend, I think one of the main themes that I get over and over again is how we have such a lack of modernization and antiquated. I don't care if it's software, hardware, whatever it is. It seems like the federal government just doesn't do anything to stay up to date or improve their technology. So last year with NOTAM going down, and from my perspective, it looked like that the Department of Transportation spent a lot of time on just changing the name of that acronym instead of updating that 30-year-old software, which was where they should have had their focus. Can you tell me what steps you've taken since your confirmation to speed up the modernization of technology, where we're at on NOTAM, and what other specific systems you may have updated?
So I think one of the challenges that we have is as we do modernize, we get stuck with a lot of legacy systems that are hard to take out of the airspace. Even some of the systems that were in place before we were born are still used. And sometimes it's the military that relies on those systems, and sometimes it's just folks that have been flying a long time. So we end up supporting a huge amount of antiquated systems, and that impedes our ability to modernize. There's been a lot of modernization over the past 10 or 15 years. What you would have seen in the TRACON and the center are new systems, and basically a new platform for new technologies to make the system more efficient. But there are over 1,000 systems that make up the airspace. Some of them are pretty old, and I think what we saw with the NOTAM is we really need to have the redundancies in place to make sure that if there's a failure, it doesn't bring the whole system to a halt. So we're very focused on the resiliency of that system, and part of what I'll be doing going forward is starting to have conversations about what the next phase of modernization is. I think the next gen phase is over, and now we need to talk about how these new technologies, advanced air mobilities and drones are coming into the system and how it's going to operate in the future.
All right. One of the other policies that I am focused on here in this committee is high-speed, high-altitude travel and civil aviation, as a matter of fact. And as a matter of fact, we got put into the FAA reauthorization and amendment that states that the FAA needs to come up with a study on how to certify new hypersonic engines. And if you look at FAA, the European counterpart, ESA, they already have issued a roadmap for high-altitude operations for hypersonic, supersonic aircraft. So can you tell us what, if anything, FAA is doing to prepare similar guidance for American airspace? And further, can you tell me what else the agency can do to ensure that American companies continue to lead in this innovative field?
I don't have a specific answer on the high-altitude airspace, but it will be part of what we look at as we talk about the airspace of the future. And we'll also look at what EASA is doing and what other jurisdictions are doing, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But I think we need also our own comprehensive roadmap that integrates these new technologies and gives us a way to bring them on as quickly as possible while keeping that same level of safety that we all want.
You know, Ed, my time's almost up, but I just wanted to make a last quick comment. When I was at TRACON, they were about 40% down on air traffic controllers. We use a lot of veterans, and they're great people to put in those positions because they're very organized and very dedicated. And I would just caution you, it seems like we've made a move to get away from hiring people on qualifications and hiring them on classifications.
So I can assure you that we hire everybody on qualifications, and I can also tell you that we have just recently put in changes to be much more flexible in how we hire out of the military, because we're able to hire from the military and put them directly into facilities. So that's one area that we're really trying to open the pipeline on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
I now recognize Ms. Holmes Norton for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and ranking member for holding this hearing to learn more about the challenges the Federal Aviation Administration is currently facing and to emphasize the importance of passing a long-term FAA reauthorization bill soon. Mr. Whitaker is co-chair of the Quiet Skies Caucus and the member who represents the District of Columbia, which is plagued by aviation noise. I have been fighting to reduce aviation noise in D.C. and across the country. Whilst the safety of the aviation system must be the FAA's priority, the FAA needs to do much more to combat airplane and helicopter noise, which will harm the health, quality of life, and the structural integrity of homes. Last year, I got 2 provisions, including in the House-passed FAA reauthorization bill, to combat helicopter noise in D.C. One of these provisions would require the FAA within 180 days to create and implement a helicopter noise sharing mechanism for all helicopter operators in the National Capital Region and to make the data collected accessible to the public online. This data would help us develop additional solutions to address helicopter noise. My other provision would direct the Government Accountability Office to conduct a study of reducing helicopter noise in D.C., almost all of which is generated by government helicopters. This study would be required to consider the extent to which military operators consider operating over unpopulated areas outside of D.C. for training missions, the extent to which vehicles or aircraft other than helicopters could be used for emergency and law enforcement response, and the extent to which helicopter operators have assessed and addressed the noise impacts of various factors of operating helicopters, including altitude, the number of flights, flight paths, time of day of flights, types of aircraft, operating procedures, and pilot training. Mr. Whitaker, what, if any, steps is the FAA taking to reduce airplane and helicopter noise over populated areas like the District of Columbia?
What I can say is in the past several years, they've made some improvements in that area. They've hired specific folks who are focused on community engagement. And in situations where airspace is being redesigned or where there are persistent noise issues, they'll engage with organizations to have community meetings and understand the views of the citizens and see if there are actually real-time changes that can happen in the airspace to try to mitigate.
We certainly haven't heard it yet. It hasn't been felt here yet.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of DC. I know that we're on a fairly tight footprint and the approach paths are fairly limited by the restricted airspace, so there probably aren't a lot of options beyond the north-south arrival and departure for DCA. So that may be a limiter in this case.
All right, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Mr. Nels for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Understand here, Mr. Administrator, I'm not on this subcommittee, so they had to wave me on. So I'm the last one in line here, but hopefully we can finish this, and I thank you so very much for your time. Obviously, this is very, very important to the industry. It really is. This legislation obviously has passed this House. It passed it overwhelmingly, and now it's sitting there over in the Senate. I think we've beat the dead horse on Part 135. Everybody knows, the FAA knows that we have pilots flying around that are 67 years old in these private aircraft with everybody else, with Delta, and we fire them at the age of 65. And that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I find this letter that was issued just a day or so before the Senate markup of a bill that has lingered for over a year on a matter that has been repeatedly proposed over 4 years, a matter that which you were asked specifically in hearings. You had a hearing before the Appropriations Committee just a few months ago, and you answered quite matter-of-factly about faithfully executing the legislation of Congress, and I think we agree with that. This is Congress's decision to make, and you will implement once it's passed, correct? All right. So now it seems like this letter, which I believe is full of flaws, and I think we've pointed those out, it seems to have some opposition to raising the age. If you read the letter and you read between the lines, it appears that the FAA that you, sir, are against raising this age, and that's just not true. You are not opposing it.
My intent was not to oppose it. My intent was to identify the issues that we've identified during technical assistance, which is around international compliance and around data for what this means to raise.
Yes, sir. And I think that we've addressed all those issues with ICAO when we raised the age from 60 to 65. All those issues got worked out. The gray on gray, remember all the gray on gray, ICAO did it. We obviously had it here, and now we don't even have the gray on gray. So the point is, I think about looking at your background, you're a former pilot, and I think you're 62 years old. You're 62 years old, right? And I think you have a 5-year term, 5 years. Do you think that we should give you a cognitive test when you turn 65? Before you finish your term out, do not believe that we should give you a test to make sure that you're all there. You got the cognitive. When you turn 65, I mean, we do it for the pilots. We do it. They get their EKGs, they get their physicals. I mean, that is a stringent process. We do it for them. Why shouldn't we do it for you?
So I think with respect to regulating airmen and the safety of the NAS, the medical certification is there to protect.
I agree.
So.
And you agree we have the safest aviation record the past 10 years. I mean, things are going very, very well, knowing that we passed legislation that allowed the Part 135s to fly to 67. We haven't had any issues. You have any issues right there with Part 135 right now? Any concerns with that safety record?
As I said earlier, I have not looked at that data.
I think, well, it's whether I'll help you. There is no problem there. There is no problem. You heard of Wheels Up? You know who that is? Delta's own little private version of their, right? I wonder how they would feel, the Delta's CEO, if you start raising concerns about their safety as it relates to Part 131. Dave in the audience, this guy right here, been at Delta for 30 years, former Air Force spy plane pilot. He's 63 and a half. America, we're going to fire this guy in 18 months. It's an arbitrary number. We just come up with it, 65. Let's just fire him. He goes through all the testing. He does it all, but we are going to fire this man because of that age. But yet, sir, you are out there touting a project to recruit retired, experienced military air traffic controllers, but an existing, fully qualified and not yet retired pilot is somehow unsatisfactory. Nobody in this hearing, my friend, I think Mr. Massey brought it up once, talked about retirement age today. Nobody brought it up because it passed this committee. It passed the House of Representatives overwhelmingly. And now it's over in the Senate. Alpa got beat over here. Ambrosi got beat. Now he's kind of through a train wreck and try to get you to confuse the other members in the Senate with this letter, making it sound like this isn't safe. All the data's there. The live environment testing's there. You can reach out to Japan, all these other countries. You know that we got pilots flying at 67, Part 135. It's all there. All the data is there. And ALPA, matter of fact, Ambrosi was served last night with a lawsuit. 2,500 ALPA union paying members filed a lawsuit on Ambrosi for a breach a breach of duty for fair representation. Shame on him. Let's get this done. And I think, sir, it is incumbent upon you to get some clarification as it relates to this letter before the Senate meets on Thursday. Would you be willing to do that for me? Look at this letter?
I'm sorry, I'd be willing to do
Would
what?
you be willing to look at this letter and look at this and try to say, hey, listen, there's some problems with this letter. It's not true.
I think I've clarified the intent of the letter.
Very good. I appreciate that. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Are there any further questions from members of the committee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank the witness for his testimony. The committee stands adjourned.